In this video, I'm going to talk about a brand new NVMe SSD from Sandisk, the WD Black SN8100. So this is actually their very first Gen 5 drive, and according to Sandisk, it is supposed to be faster than anything else on the market. So let's check it out, let's see how it performs and how it compares to a lot of other drives that we've tested so far. So let's begin. The SN8100 will be available in 3 capacities: 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes, and 4 terabytes. And right now, you can only get the version without the heatsink. The heatsink version, as well as an 8 terabyte model, will be joining the lineup later this year. We've tested the 2 terabyte model for this review, and as you can see, it is a single-sided drive, which should also be the case for the 1 and 4 terabyte options. Now, if we look at the spec sheet, there's not as many details as I would like to see. They do mention they're using the latest TLC NAND from Sandisk and a DRAM cache. There's some performance numbers, a fairly typical 600 terabytes per terabyte capacity total bytes written rating, a 5-year-long warranty, support for TCG Opal, and that it uses 7 watts of power, which is interesting since most Gen 5 drives use a lot more. But they don't mention how much RAM is being used for caching, and they don't mention which controller they used at all. Now, we did ask them about it, and they said it is a customized SMI2508 controller, but they didn't want to share what was so custom about it. And in my opinion, a manufacturer should always list the exact controller being used, because if they don't, it just feels like they are keeping the option open to change the controller later depending on supply without actually rebranding the entire product. So I always just like to see it listed clearly. But let's see how this drive performs, and as always, I'm going to start with the PCMark 10 Quick Benchmark, which is a nice collection of tests that simulate a lot of simple little things we do with our PCs every single day. So things like working with documents, looking at photos, loading your games, and so on. And this is a very useful test for anyone that is looking for a drive to use for those simple little things. So it is definitely not a use case that requires an expensive high-end Gen 5 SSD like this one, but you still kind of wanted to do well in this test. And the SN8100 set a new record here. So most Gen 5 drives I tested, like the Samsung 9100 Pro and several other models based on the Phison's E26 controller, like the Crucial T705, Corsair MP700 Pro SE, MSI M580, or the Aorus 14000, averaged around 1000 megabytes per second in this test, while the SN8100 is about 10% faster. The full PCMark 10 suite simulates a bit more intense and a bit more serious use of the drive, and this is a great benchmark to look at if you're looking for a new main drive or you need to run some applications that can be very heavy on your SSD, like video editing, for example. And the SN8100 is pretty impressive in this test as well, averaging almost 1200 megabytes per second compared to 1000-ish for most of its high-end competition. And if we look at the latency, the drives are mostly in the same order, making the SN8100 the first Gen 5 SSD to really make a meaningful step forward. The consistency test is not that relevant for most of you because it simulates a very extreme and very intense multi-hour workload that most people will never ever do. But it is always interesting to see how a drive holds up when you really stress it for such a long time, and then especially so when you have an expensive high-end SSD like this one. And unfortunately, this is where the SN8100 started to struggle, and it really fell behind the 9100 Pro from Samsung, many Phison E26 based Gen 5 drives, and even high-end Gen 4 drives like the Samsung 990 Pro. 3D Mark Storage Benchmark is a bundle of tests that simulate a lot of different gaming-related tasks, like loading games, installing games, recording your gameplay, moving your game folders around, and so on. And this is a very useful benchmark for anyone that is looking for an SSD to use primarily for gaming. And in this test, the SN8100 just destroyed everything else. So we run every benchmark multiple times, but the difference here was so big, I ended up testing it many times more, and I even retested other drives a few times more because it was just hard to instantly believe that a new Gen 5 SSD could be about 25% faster than every single drive before it. But it is. And if we just look at the gaming results that I personally find most important, which is loading times, installing games, and updating your games, it really stands out from everything else yet again. So until now, the best Gen 5 drives were only about 20 to 25% faster than the fastest Gen 4 drive I've tested so far, which is the Crucial T500. But the SN8100 ended up 59% ahead of the T500, which puts it 27% ahead of the fastest Gen 5 SSD I've tested so far, which is the Corsair MP700 Pro SE. Sequential read and write performance numbers don't really represent proper real-life use as well as previous benchmarks do, but it can still be a very useful metric for some people. And when it comes to sequential writes, the SN8100 took another first spot, just beating the 9100 Pro from Samsung. In sequential reads, we're hitting the limits of my Gen 5 motherboard, and here the SN8100 was tied with the 9100 Pro, with a few others close behind it. That also means that it is well above Sony's required read speed for PS5 use, but as I said before, the PlayStation 5 doesn't support PCIe Gen 5 speeds just yet, so buying an expensive Gen 5 SSD will not make that much sense at all, and you're probably way better off buying a more mainstream DRAM-based Gen 4 SSD instead. Now, Sandisk is focusing on power consumption with this drive as well, and it is definitely looking like an efficiency upgrade over anything that is Phison E26 based, but whether your SSD uses 11, 7 or even 5 watts, you still want to use a heatsink because if you stress it without a heatsink, it will get really hot within a few minutes and it will start to throttle and lose performance. So you should definitely use a heatsink that comes with your motherboard, or you can buy a simple third-party heatsink for a couple of euros or dollars and you're going to be more than fine. I'm going to put some suggestions in the description box down below. So there are definitely a couple of things that you need to consider with the new WD Black SN8100. It had lower than expected results in the consistency test, which means that you probably shouldn't use this drive for your database server or any situation where your SSD will get really stressed 24 hours a day. And they also need to make sure that their spec table is complete so it doesn't leave any doubt of whether the performance we've seen today will change in the future, because this is an incredible performer. It is significantly faster than anything else in most of the benchmarks, and then especially so when it comes to gaming. And it wasn't just beating the competition, it was often just completely destroying it, which is not something that we see a lot when it comes to SSDs. When it comes to pricing, I only have recommended retail prices at the moment, and not what they will actually cost in shops. And as always, launch day MSRPs are not that great. $550 for the 4TB model is very hard to justify when a T705 will cost you less than $400, and a decent Gen 4 drive a lot less than that. But this is what always happens with new SSDs. So the launch day MSRPs are very high, but the actual prices go down and then settle to a more reasonable spot very quickly. So I kind of do expect to see some more competitive numbers here too. And when that happens, I'm sure that this will become one of the most popular options on the market. So do keep your eye on the prices in your region, and if you find a good deal, this is definitely the Gen 5 SSD to get. That's all. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, and to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. Thank you all for watching and sticking to the end of this video. I really hope you liked it and it was helpful enough. If you want to see more videos like this one, please do consider clicking that subscribe button so you never miss my future uploads. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!